The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Welcome back to Fortune's Wheel Podcast. My name's Jonathan, and we're starting a new bend in the narrative of the 11th century with this episode. This episode kicks off a series covering the epic story of the First Crusade, a millennium-defining event that not only spawned numerous sequels, but also shaped and reshaped national boundaries, church doctrine, and Christian-Muslim-Jewish relationships really going forward. Now, quick heads up, this episode is more relaxed than we're used to, just me chatting into a microphone, but there is a very special announcement at the end that I hope you stick around for. Not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited about what's coming. Now, this show now stays free with no paywalls, very proud of that, because history belongs, in my opinion, to everyone. If you want to help keep it that way, you can fuel the next episode through Buy Me a Coffee. The link's in the show notes, along with a link to our full archive on YouTube. This is episode 192, entitled The World of the First Crusade. Thank you for listening, thank you for your support, and I hope you enjoy the show. The year is now 1095, and Europe is undergoing major transformations. In fact, the entire 11th century has been one tumultuous transformation after another, but those are stories for another time. We've covered many of them here on the show. As for the year 1095, Western Europe was stunned by the revelations at Piacenza, while Eastern Europe, such as Eastern Rome or Kievan Rus territory in the Balkans, were battling everything from dynastic disputes to violent raids from the likes of the Cumans, the Pechenegs, and of course, the Seljuk Turks. What's more is that all over the globe, the 1090s seem to have a steep increase in, well, pretty strange events, actually. We remember back in 1066, there was this comet that was seen across northern Europe, and it just so happened to coincide with the deaths of Harold Hardrada and King Harold II Godwinson, and the ascension of Duke William to the throne of England, thus upending everything in the North Sea region. People at the time weren't unaware of the comet or the conquest, and therefore plenty was made of the two occurring almost simultaneously. Well, the 1090s were that on steroids, to be quite honest. On May 31st, 1090, a total solar eclipse occurred across Europe. The continent cooled for a few minutes on that day, the sky briefly turning the Earth into a muted version of itself. Having been in the 99% of the 2024 solar eclipse here in the United States, I can admit it's one of the coolest, eeriest experiences that one can imagine. To live through that and not feel something, I don't know what to tell you then. Localized reports of drought, poor harvests, and pestilence followed later that year across Western Europe, but of course it was nothing compared to what would happen in the early 1300s, which we'll get to soon enough. A significant earthquake in the Sinai Peninsula in the Middle East happened on February 12, 1091, and this was corroborated by later chroniclers as well as modern seismological catalogs. And an odd but rather devastating tornado, of all things, recorded by William of Malmesbury and Florence of Worcester, it hit London on October 17th of that same year, wrecking Cheapside and St. Mary-le-Beau areas of the city. To give you an idea of the power of the what's called Great Whirlwind of London, there were timbers at least 25 feet long that were pile-drived into the ground so hard by that tornado that only 4 feet of them were above ground. Sadly, well over 500 houses were completely flattened, and 2 people did die in that. Oh, and London wasn't done in 1091 either. No, records also indicate that an earthquake hit the city and damaged the London Bridge as well. On October 18th, the next year, 1092, Abbot Walker of Malvern correctly predicted a lunar eclipse. Not just the day, but the time as well. Folks along the Herefordshire and Oxfordshire borders saw a red moon that night, which of course must have been a shocking thing to behold. Folks seem to have been given a reprieve in 1093, as I couldn't find anything recorded, but it kicked back up in 1094. But curiously, and this is where modern calculations are fascinating in my opinion, curiously, those modern calculations show a number of lunar and solar eclipses in and around Europe, though medieval chronicles, records, and letters all seem to be silent on them. Make of that what you will, but it calls into question throughout history how many things are missing simply because the people of the time couldn't connect it to a specific, result in their environment and lives. So who knows what actually is missing. Now, also in 1094, a few records point to a concerning mortality event in northern France. Also in Germany and the Low Countries had reports as well. No one slapped the label of plague on it yet, but it smells of it slightly. An outbreak of what they called St. Anthony's Fire occurred back in 1090 in Germany, and again in 1095 in Aquitaine. But in 1094, we'll have to just speculate on the very localized dying of folks in those areas, though there are hints of ergotism, which is a type of poisoning that pops up all over human records since time immemorial. See, ergot is a fungus that produces powerful alkaloid toxins, and it sets it in grains and rye and whatnot. During the Middle Ages, ergotism came in 2 varieties, the convulsive type that caused devastating seizures, powerful hallucinations, and even crippling mania, and the gangrenous type that gave one the feeling that one's skin was literally on fire, hence the name St. Anthony's Fire. See, it rotted the flesh after a time, and one could easily lose multiple limbs in a single ergot attack. Both of these versions, to be clear, were incredibly deadly. I think we can figure that out. 2 notable outbreaks of St. Anthony's Fire, for instance, occurred in Germany in the year 1090 and in Aquitaine again in 1095. I'm sure this will hardly be the last time we come across ergotism in the course of this podcast. Now, what's more is that in 1095, there was another localized mortality event in Ireland, and this one's called the Great Pestilence of 1095, but I couldn't tell you what the culprit was. We just know that the Irish records called the Annals of the Four Masters recorded it. And it was a doozy, apparently. We know how medieval records exaggerate, but it's said that up to 1/4 of Ireland was affected. So, seems like it was kind of a big deal. Now, what's more is that during the famines of 1094, things were so bad in parts of France that the people resorted to eating what is recorded as bark bread. Well, what does that really tell us? It tells us that the people were so distrustful of their own food supply that they resorted to eating tree bark. I don't know how bad things were, but things aren't good when you're eating tree bark. That same year, records show devastating flooding in the Low Countries, wiping out entire communities and sending countless inland, which, as we know, any sudden influx of people in a region naturally strains established systems to the breaking point. And finally, just after the Council of Piacenza in March of 1095, in April, there was a rather large meteor shower. This shower was also called by one chronicler, quote, a marvelous shower of stars, end quote. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states in its 1095 entry, quote, There was on the second night before the none of April across the land, which stars falling from the heavens, not as individuals, but in groups of two. End quote. Pretty curious. This was actually corroborated by records in China in the same year of that rather intense period of meteors in the month of April. These were almost without question the Lyrids, or the Lyrids, depending on where you are. The Lyrid meteor shower is an annual meteor shower occurring in April when the Earth passes through the debris trail of Comet Thatcher, which is C/1861 G1. It's entirely normal to see around 15 shooting stars per hour, but every so often Earth will pass through a rather thick patch of the debris field that we can see hundreds and hundreds per hour. 1095 must have been one of those years, but you can only imagine what the people of the day thought. From the tiny streaks across the black sky to legit fireballs screaming overhead. I couldn't imagine not having an understanding of what those things were, actually were, and yet seeing them crisscrossing the sky above my head, especially in light of all that had occurred around me over the previous 5 years or so, that's just a lot to handle. Either way, Europe was already on the razor's edge of tension, politically, religiously, technologically, militarily, and economically. Not all tension is negative, mind you, but I'd like to walk through some of these tensions and advancements and inventions to ground us more firmly into the world of 1095, the world that did breathe life into the First Crusade. The 11th century had no shortage of leaps forward. Let's take a first look at technology. The heavy plow. The heavy plow broke Northern Europe's thick soils and expanded agricultural yields. The horse collar and horseshoes allowed horses to replace oxen for longer journeys, as well as draft animals necessary for faster projects. Windmills, likely appearing in France by the 1090s, these complemented water mills already existing in grinding grain and pumping water. Of course, water mills were already in widespread use by this time, but they expanded in size, allowing for not only larger workloads, but also different jobs, like sawing wood, crushing olives, and even forging iron. And though proper spectacles, eyeglasses, were still a couple hundred years away, check this out. The 11th century, I found, actually did see some tinkering in reading aids in various monasteries. Yeah, eyeglasses were just beginning to be played with by the monks in the 11th century. Now, economically speaking, 3-field crop rotations. Now, this is a huge one in agriculture, one that we could easily look past in our daily lives today. But crop rotations, this is where it's at. You want bigger populations. You want healthier crop yields. You need 3-field crop rotations. These allowed land to rest while boosting productivity compared to the older 2-field system. Now, fairs and free markets around France, southern Germany, and northern Italy started gaining traction in the late 11th century as well, with money-based exchange supplementing barter. It's worth mentioning that this sort of coinage existed, of course, but people were much more willing and able to carry vast treasures long distances, in case, one ever decides to pack up everything and they can and sell the rest and, move across the continent on a pilgrimage of sorts. So these fairs and free markets were flooded with new money in 1095. Now, market towns and trade hubs, these facilitated Europe's increasing ambulatory population, such as the Normans. These grew predominantly around castles and monasteries, birthing the first whispers of what we know today of as medieval city life, what we see in our old novels that have come down to us in poems. Now, coinage expansion, as I said earlier, this is worth repeating. Regional mints popped up everywhere by 1095. So the access to coins for transport made traveling so much easier than it ever was before. Again, far, far superior than the barter method. Now, militarily, the 11th century saw some major changes as well. Castles. First and foremost, castles. They were beginning to be everywhere, and we can't forget that the Normans were also moving everywhere, and the Normans were pretty good castle builders. Now, motte and baileys did spread across France and Germany throughout the 11th century, even before that a little bit. Even southern Italy and Sicily, moving with the Normans and French wherever they seemed to go. But these motte and baileys also crept northward, namely, as we are well aware of, in England, that quite literally exploded with both motte and baileys as well as proper stone castles. Stone castles were being used moving southward across really wherever the Normans and the French went. And Norman cavalry tactics were revolutionized by the introduction of the stirrup, not to mention the simple lesson of how to board and transport horses by boat, which brought cavalry warfare where the winds could sail the army. Not so prevalent by 1095 was the proliferation of the crossbow. This became increasingly common throughout the 11th century, much to my surprise. That was not on my radar of things that I would come across. But it would take the world by storm as crossbowmen made such a devastating impact in the First Crusade. It made such an impact that the Catholic Church even tried to ban the use of the crossbow in 1096. That's pretty impressive for the crossbow. And we will see some devastating, and I mean absolutely devastating, crossbowmen in the coming centuries. Now, hauberks, which were long shirts made of chainmail, these became the standard for knights by the beginning of the First Crusade, along with conical helmets and kite shields, which all were major improvements to keep the lethality of the warriors high, while also keeping them alive to fight another day. It's kind of an important thing in war. You want your soldiers to be alive to fight another day. Now, switching gears religiously, well, we've spent a good amount of time on this one, but some major points to refresh our memories here. Of course, the largest one probably is the Gregorian Reform movement. Started long before Pope Gregory VII, but most certainly polished and perfected by him. Well, with Pope Urban II now in St. Peter's, these reforms were without question leading the church into the 1090s. They combated buying and selling of church offices, enforced strict clerical celibacy, and strengthened papal supremacy to unheard of levels. Gregory VII experienced a fair bit of success here, but it was Urban II who would enjoy a gigantic bump. The Cluniac monasteries had already popped up, really all over southern France, and they were starting to spread elsewhere, but because of the success of the Gregorian reforms, Cluniac monasteries will pop up everywhere and seemingly all at once after this as well. This point focuses on the monastery specifically. And these monasteries pushed for strict adherence to St. Benedict's rules, strict adherence to certain worship guidelines, and independence from local lords, which is a big one. But make no mistake, these reformed monasteries were, you can't overstate this point, they were pumping out pro-Gregorian monks and clergy as fast as possible. Now, there was also during this time a pilgrimage culture, which by 1095 was also at an all-time high. Everyone, seemingly, if they could, was trying to make a pilgrimage throughout the 11th century. Now, relics created pilgrimage routes, which exploded with economic prosperity, as well as new opportunities for crime, by the way, which this, of course, reshaped European religious geography. Do not sleep on the pilgrimage culture of the 11th century. It will directly feed into, obviously, the First Crusade. Now, Romanesque architecture was also quickly spreading, following the Normans, of course, wherever they went. Now, barrel vaults changed the game, and I can't understate this either. It allowed for truly massive stone churches, as well as floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the insides of once cave-like churches. Sculpted tympanums also began defining medieval skylines. In the coming decades, we're not even talking centuries at this point, in the coming decades, I can't wait to spend some time outlining and showing all the innovations from this Romanesque architecture movement that the Normans were spreading at wildfire pace. And finally, this brings us to some political tensions. Now, papal monarchy, this idea, papal monarchy, seemed to become a rather appropriate term by 1095. The investiture controversy may have formally begun between Pope Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, but it would long outlast the both of them, setting the stage for decades of church-state tensions. In France, politically speaking, there was a consolidation of the Capetian power in the form of the dying dynasty steadily clawing its way back to real power. As we know, France had for so long been less a kingdom and more of a feudal federation of dukes and powerful rivals. Oh, and there was that king over there, but we just ignored him most times. It was that mentality. Now, French kings increasingly got tired of that system, as you can imagine, and began pulling them slowly, all of his vassals, one by one, back under their purview. That was a big shift in France in the late 11th century. Now, throughout the 11th century, there was an unofficial codification of feudalism across France and England as well. To be sure, feudalism wasn't some single agreed upon economic or political system. Rather, it was based on vast, complex webs of vassalage, homage, honor, and fiefs. This will only gain in exposure and influence in the coming decades, really. But it's worth mentioning that though there were close similarities, there wasn't just one way to feudalism, you could say, by the 1090s. This will change, but not quite yet. It's kind of this patchwork of different ways of doing it by the time the First Crusade started. So this, folks, this was the quilt of tensions, religiously, technologically, economically, politically, all militarily. This was the patchwork that Europe was heading into the First Crusade, the call even for the First Crusade. But before we get out of here, I found a few more fun facts that I thought I'd share to really grasp the world on the eve of the First Crusade. And I want to just share those with you. These will be kind of random, but I thought you'd be interested in them. So first of all, how rich was Cluny Abbey, actually? Well, they had their own goldsmiths. That's how rich Cluny Abbey was. They had their own goldsmiths. Now, this was the expanse of their presence and influence across the continent. They were making their own coinage and all the rest. Cluny was a powerhouse, to say the least. Next, how similar, here's another question, how similar was Catholic teaching in those days to more modern times? Well, it was absolutely accepted to consult star charts to predict various events. This one kind of surprised me. Now, what's that mean, though? Well, that means that alongside theology in cathedral schools, astrology was taught as well. That one surprised me. As for seafaring innovations, well, the Pisans, we know, were the main, the big dogs on the block, but the Pisans flew a flag high atop their masts, warning anyone with evil intentions, just steer clear. The Genoese would adopt something similar in the early 1200s, which would, by the end of that century, fun fact, become the proud St. George's flag of England. That's a story for another time. In the 1090s, though, while Pisa instilled fear through a flag, the Venetians were tinkering with the idea of convoys to ward off potential piracy. This convoy system would eventually bring thousands of knights to the Holy Land over the next century or two. How about war horses? Well, many knights valued them so highly that they were awarded burials and memorials, a practice that would have been brought into the Holy Land had they not had to resort to eating so many of them due to their starvation. Sorry about that. It's a bit of spoiler for First Crusade. We'll get to that. Now, while the Kievan Rus were enjoying the finest silk from Constantinople and pushing thick, expensive Eastern European squirrel pelts to Western Europe, while that was going on, Aquitaine's wine industry began to pop, beginning, of course, with the monasteries, but it wouldn't stay there for long. Fun fact, one of their biggest exports, obviously, was wine, but Aquitaine's biggest markets in 1095 for wine, those were in England, actually. And speaking of trade goods, Iberia found salt so valuable that it was worth more than silver during the 1090s. And the salt industry kept both the Christian kingdoms to the north and the Almoravid invaders in the south economically afloat. And if you thought that the Doomsday Book was a landmark one-off back in 1086, well, think again. Under William Rufus, that is William II, King of England. See, under him, England revised and updated and expanded the original data well into the 1090s, thus shaping and evolving the English system into what King Henry I would use so masterfully during his reign in just a few short years from this. Speaking of taxes and counting, most Europeans still use their fingers to count with during this time, while most continental monks still utilized Roman numerals. However, little did they know, through the 1090s and the Reconquista in Iberia, Christians there began using Arabic numerals, the very same we all use today. And speaking of monks in southern France and up into Lorraine, Cluniac monasteries began tinkering with a new calligraphy style, one that will really be synonymous with medieval script. This was called the Caroline minuscule, for those nerds in the crowd, of which, by the way, I am one. I found that pretty fascinating. And interestingly, though the Romans and the Byzantines had colored glass technology, it wasn't until Augsburg Cathedral installed one as a larger window in 1065 that stained glass windows became a Western thing in cathedrals. So by 1095, there were a few others who had installed smaller versions of it. But the vast movements around the continent during the First Crusade would usher in a transfer of knowledge that would specifically, for stained glass, catch fire and spread. We'll see again this going back to my cathedrals information earlier. We'll see this in stunning detail soon enough. And back to architecture, with Christians moving ever further southward in Iberia, well, Christian builders were beginning to toy with the Islamic style of horseshoe arches. Seems minor, but this would actually usher in a Western innovation that would change architecture forever. This was called the Gothic Point Arch. Look at any Gothic cathedral, you'll see the point arch, and it's pretty stunning. Now listen, the world of 1095 was a vastly different world than even a century before. Remember, a century earlier was in another millennium. In my armchair historian opinion, the 11th century is the single most slept-on century in the last 2,000 years. The technological innovations, the roller coaster religious movements, the colossal figures, man, there are so many colossal figures, the legendary stories, the economic advancements, and newly established trade connections, there is simply no shortage to the grandeur that was the 11th century. I only hope I've done it justice in our first, nearly 200 episodes of the show. But just like the 11th century, this show is always evolving as well. For instance, I'm currently looking into merch options. So if you have any, let me know. Good outlets, whatever it is. Merch has been something I've gotten quite a bit of feedback on over the last couple of years. So I've decided to open up an avenue to grab t-shirts and coffee mugs and hats and more. Just need to vet it all out, get my designs uploaded, which I do have some that I'm pretty excited about. So stay tuned on that one. Also, if you want to simply make a donation to the production and research of the show, or even just a little donation or appreciation for all the work that goes into creating a show like this one, please consider the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes as well. Okay, plugs out of the way. I have just one more very special evolution of the show that means more to me than all the others, I think. And based on polls and messages, almost since the beginning 5 years ago, I think you will all love the direction the show's starting to go in. Starting on the next episode. I'm beyond excited to bring you our very first interview in the show's history. And I hope the first of many, many more. I want to sincerely thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening to this. This began as a passion project of personal accountability, to be honest. I didn't know much at all about the Middle Ages. I decided to change that. For accountability purposes, I decided to record what I've researched and learned, and thus Fortune's Wheel podcast was born back in June of 2020. 5 years later, 192 episodes, thousands of subscribers, can't believe that one, over 160,000 listens on Spotify alone, listeners in 124 countries. I'm nothing in this world if I'm not grateful and humble for the opportunities and the gifts I receive in life. Every listen and every listener is a gift I don't deserve and an opportunity that I am eternally grateful for. So I humbly offer, wherever you are, whatever your nation, whatever your culture, religion, ethnicity, race, whoever you are, and whatever makes you you, I humbly offer you my appreciation. This podcast may be focusing on the Western perspective of the Middle Ages, and I won't try to pretend I don't have my biases. I certainly do. But I hope this show also offers mutual understanding. We all are who we are because they were who they were. So let's jump into one of the most divisive times, at least through our modern lens of things, in world history. How about that? And I'd like to introduce you to Fortune's Wheel's first interview episode. Be sure to leave a quick reply to this. I'm fascinated to see what you guys have to say. Tell me what you liked about the new episode format. Tell me what you didn't like. Tell me your thoughts. It's okay to disagree. Just let me know your thoughts. Until next time.
Are you in multifamily property management? Then you need to know Elise AI, the top AI automation platform that streamlines leasing, maintenance, rent, and renewals across text, voice, and email. You can enhance resident experiences, boost NOI, and centralize operations with the industry's best conversational AI and CRM that's trusted by over 500 owners and operators. Discover what Elise AI can do for your communities today at eliseai.com.
Every minute your finance team spends wrestling with data is a minute lost. Insight Software's AI-powered insights instantly move you from complexity to clarity. Automated analysis, real-time reporting, strategic recommendations, all at your fingertips. Transform how your finance team works and watch your business grow. Stop wasting time. Start making smarter decisions. Learn more at insightsoftware.com/AI.